welcome to this week's Bare Necessities. I'm Bear Kalesqua, the Religious Education Chaplain and Director of Communications for First UU Church Austin. It's a pleasure to have you back in my kitchen. So far we've explored a couple of recipes. The very first week we did my chocolate chip cookies that are my absolute go-to. You can keep them in the freezer, pop them in the oven, and get them going. That way you always have something fresh to kind of heal your heart. Last week I introduced everybody to one of my family's favorite breakfast recipes, sourdough pancakes. So we started playing with a little bit of sourdough, which is one of my favorite tools in the kitchen, aside from this girl here. Love her. Her name's Loretta. You'll get to know her well. This week we are going to be making English muffins, which is another great go-to in the mornings. My family loves them because, one, carbs, and two, they give a little bit of that sourdough chewiness to them without being overkill. So let's get started. For this, you will need 3.5 cups of flour, just all-purpose flour. It's perfectly fine. If you're gonna do whole wheat, make sure to supplement it with some all-purpose because the whole wheat will be too heavy for these. So I would say do a 50-50 ratio. So if it's 3.5, then you're going to do 1 3/4 cups of whole wheat and then 1 3/4 cup of the all-purpose. Now, what I'm presenting here is also a half recipe, so remember that. Usually this is 7 cups, so keep that in mind. I also have an extra cup of flour just in case. It's been really humid lately, and so the dough may actually take a little more flour to make it not so sticky, because what we're shooting for is a not sticky but very soft dough. Also, we have a tablespoon of sugar with 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast. I've already mixed them together because they're all going into the same place anyway. Then I have a 1/4 cup of non-fat dry milk. This may seem a little strange, but it adds that nice creamy flavor to it, and it also helps kind of bolster the yeast a little bit more and give them a little bit more to work with because of the sugars and carbohydrates inside the milk. And we have 1 cup of warm, not hot water. You can substitute that with milk instead of the dry milk, and that's perfectly fine, but make sure it's warm to about 105 degrees because we're going to be putting everything in together. This is all in and mix, so you want it to hold on to a little bit of its heat after it gets put in. And finally, we're going to use a 1/2 cup of sourdough starter. This can be either what you're going to discard anyway, or it can just be from fresh feed. The fresh feed is going to be a little bit better because you're going to get a lot more vim and vigor from your sourdough starter. Because it's been freshly fed, they're all going crazy. So they're going to keep going at it and eat through this dough and get it nice and sour. So let's get mixing. All right, so we're going to add the water, and then our sugar and yeast. And I'm just going to go ahead and give that a little swirl. It doesn't need to be mixed like crazy. We're going to let that sit for just a minute. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and get my sourdough starter. Oh, an ingredient I missed. You also need 2 teaspoons of sugar, additional, 2 teaspoons of salt, additional, and 2 tablespoons of butter. Let's not forget those. You need the fat and you need the salt. And the extra sugar is just in case the dough isn't as happy as it should be. But if your yeast is good, don't worry about it. So let's go ahead and add our starter to this. Now remember, it's 1/2 cup. So we're just going to add a 1/2 cup of our very well-fed, recently fed starter. Let me just get all of that out of there. I'm going to grab a spatula, because we don't want to miss a single drop. I think I kind of introduced you to her last week. Her name is GLaDOS. Those of you who play video games know who that is. Let's go ahead and mix our sourdough starter into the yeast and sugar and warm water. And now we're going to add our 3.5 cups of flour. Like I said, this is all in. Then our 1/4 cup of non-fat dry milk. And this is optional, but this is an 1/8 of a teaspoon, teeny tiny amount, of citric acid. It helps give even more of the sour flavor to these English muffins. Can't find the lid to close. I'll just put her over here. Okay, give that a swirl. All right, now we're going to add our 2 teaspoons of salt. And then with that, we are going to go ahead and add our 2 tablespoons of butter. And your butter needs to be absolutely room temperature, not melted though. All right, now that you have everything in your bowl, including the butter, the salt, try not to forget it, we can go ahead and start mixing. So we're gonna put this onto 1 or 2, depending, probably on a 2 for today, out of the tin set. And we're gonna let it mix for about 5 minutes or until the dough is completely combined. And again, not sticky. So I will see you in about 30 seconds. So I ended up letting it go for about 6 minutes, and it just wasn't picking up any of the dough on the outside. So I really wanted it to get some extra time to really knead in there. I also had to add 3 tablespoons of flour. My starter may have been a little too wet. It might be humid. Who knows? Flour can be pretty temperamental, so you have to keep an eye out for that. So the 3 additional tablespoons worked for me. It's going to be different for you, and that's fine. So now we're just going to go ahead and take the dough down from the hook. I mean, look at that stretch. And it should come fairly cleanly off the hook because it has been kneaded properly. We're just going to push it down into the bottom of the bowl and then cover it. So let's let this go for an hour and a half, and I will see you back then. The dough is ready to be turned out onto a floured working surface, so I'm going to go ahead and get it loose out of the bowl. And now the job is to get this to about half an inch in thickness. So let's go ahead and roll it out to half an inch thickness, a little bit thin, because these puff when they cook. And we do have one more rise ahead of us as well. All right, so far that's 7. Let's go ahead and re-roll. And this is what I meant by one of the best parts of this is that re-rolling it is perfectly fine. You can work up a little extra gluten. This is going to rest more. So let's cut out a few more. And then we will roll it out again until we get all the muffins we can get out of this dough. So right now we have 11, but of course there were the thin ones. So we're going to make the last probably 2 out of this remnant of dough. So just cut that straight out the middle. And I'm going to take this last little ball, this little boule, and first shape it, since it's from the absolute remnants of the dough. It's gonna have a few fissures otherwise. So I'm just drawing in the bottom of it so that it's kind of tight. And I'm going to roll it just slightly larger than my cutter because the cut sides help them rise a little bit better. You can leave them just as balls and then kind of squash them flat just by hand if they look like this. And that's fine. That's kind of nice because then it looks way more homemade. But in order to get, for me, a nice rise with that nice thick center line, you just cut the side, trimming off just a little bit. So yes, there's a little tiny bit. Now that would make an English muffin for me. And in fact, I think it will. All right, so we've got them shaped. Let's just sprinkle a tiny bit more flour over the tops just to help them not stick to the parchment. And here's where I diverge from the standard, is usually you'll coat them top and bottom with cornstarch. And you'll notice I'm not doing that. I'm using regular all-purpose flour. One, because I don't have cornstarch, and two, I rarely ever use cornstarch on these. Sometimes I'll use semolina, which is just another ground flour. It's used a lot for pasta making. So I might use that if I had it. I don't. So now we've got these. We're going to go ahead and cover them with another piece of parchment. Or if you have them with cornmeal on them, just use a tea towel. All right, these are going to rise for another at least half an hour, but I will see you back once these have risen a little bit more and we will start baking them. All right, so it's the time we've all been waiting for. I went ahead and let these rise their second time after we shaped them, and they got just a little bit poofy. May have rolled them too flat, but I don't know. Now we bake them on a griddle or a non-greased frying pan. Doesn't have to be non-stick or anything. Remember, there's cornstarch on the ones that you're using, or mine only had flour, but the same principle applies. You don't want them to be on a greased pan. They won't stick, don't worry. And you want to be able to get as many of them as possible without crowding onto your pan. That way you can cook them all, or at least as close to all together as possible. And these are going to cook for about 12 minutes on each side, and then once they're done, the sides will still be a little bit soft, and that's okay. That's what you want, because when they set up with the soft sides, the interior will be nice and fluffy still. So we're going to go ahead and let these bake for 12 minutes, probably another 11 now, and then we will turn them. So I'll see you in 30 seconds. So it's time to flip them. It's been 12 minutes. Now, usually you bake these at 350, or if you're doing it on a skillet on your stove, at a medium to medium low heat, preferably medium low. Apparently my griddle, even though I have it at 350, is running a little high, so I'm going to go ahead and knock the temperature down to 300 for the rest of the bake. So now we're going to go ahead and let them continue baking for another 12 minutes, and we'll be right back. See you in 30 seconds. All right, y'all, so it's been another 11 minutes. It's actually been like 11 and a half because I'm lazy. Let's get these off of here and onto a cooling rack because they need to cool. And you're going to want to let them, again, cool for a couple of hours just because it helps them kind of set their structure really well. So for now, I will just take these, put them away on the counter, and we're going to talk about these. So we have the little mini, like the little Bare Belly special, and then we have the short one. So let me grab it. My handy dandy bread knife. And a cutting board, because while my counters are clean and they are quartz, I don't want to risk messing them up or my knife, because I love this bread knife. All right, we're going to go ahead and cut the little thin one, like I said earlier. And as I warned you, because we didn't let it sit up too terribly long, it's still going to be a little bready on the inside, but if you look, there's lots of little bubbles and crannies. It would have more if it was one of the thicker ones. Trust me, these over here have a lot larger bubble structure, but this has a nice grain, and oh my gosh, it smells amazing. Let me try the little guy. So delicate. And again, you see, like, it's kind of dense because it's so small, but it's got a lot of bubbles in the structure. So that's yet another way that you can use some of your excess starter. There's so many other things that are so good that we can make with it. Sourdough is useful in so many different recipes in so many different ways. There's a sourdough chocolate cake that I'm hoping to get to show you at some point. So my beloveds, I hope you get a chance to make this. So until next week, I hope you all have moments of peace and moments of grace. And moments where you kind of forget yourself and eat some carbs. I know I have. But it's so good. Be good to one another. Be good to yourself. That's all I ask. But your community is here, and we are working to find ways to stay as connected as possible. I'll see you next week. Bye.